Now, here's kind of where we are now, because you've laid out very clearly the three phases where we at, and now then the question is, where do we go from here? Because so far, I think it's pretty arguable that we definitely lost the air war, we definitely lost the blockade war, and we're losing the tit for tat war. I guess you can't say lost past tense yet, because that's kind of still where we are. But there are others who recognize that, and they're saying, hey, how about this? How's about we go back to war? I know that sounds like a great idea. It didn't work the first time, but maybe this time it is. And that is led by General Keith Kellogg.
There's a big rule in war about simplicity, and I'll make it really simple for you. I think what they ought to do right now, what I'd recommend to the president, is you take that 14-point MOU and you throw it away. And you start to make the Iranians understand that we are not equals in this fight at all. Because what you just said, we've decimated their military forces. We were able to penetrate at will. And so there's three demands we have. One is we're going to send the IAEA to get the enriched uranium and the centrifuges with American support, with no restrictions at all. Number two, we're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And if you attack it, we'll attack back. And if you damage any ships, we're going to take the fungible reserves that you have in place, which are in the billions, and pay those shipping companies the cost of either losing a ship or getting damage to a ship. And the third, you're going to lay off your neighbors.
Yeah, so basically, you lost, and you're going to do what we tell you, and we're just going to pretend like the first 40 days didn't happen, I guess. Now, I'll tell you, John, you may say, oh, well, that's just this lunatic guy. I mean, he's been saying nonsense from the beginning, and no one's going to actually listen to him. But then, just before we came on the air here, Gary passed this on to me. It's like, oh, snap. The USS Abraham Lincoln is re-entering the Gulf of Oman, just 250 kilometers off the Iran's Charbahar coast, and oddly within missile range. What do you make of what he said, what the general said, and what this news shows?
Well, what people like the General Kellogg, never spell out is how things have changed since the 40-day air war in ways that are going to allow us to achieve victory now when we were unable to achieve victory then. I mean, again, you always want to ask yourself, and I don't have to tell you this, but you always have to ask yourself, what's your theory of victory? How do you produce the objectives that you care about? How do you bring this war to an end on favorable terms? And how does air power alone do that for you? We tried it for 40 days and it didn't work. And he doesn't say anything about that. I mean, there are all sorts of dimensions that have to be addressed here. It's very clear that we ran down our inventory of critically important weapons. Things like Tomahawks, things like Patriots, and so forth and so on. And one of the reasons we stopped after 40 days is that we didn't have an endless inventory of weapons. We just told the Japanese that we're not going to be able to deliver all the Tomahawks we promised them on time. Because we're really hurting when it comes to Tomahawk cruise missiles. This tells you something. So he's talking about, going back at it again. Do we have the weaponry to do that? And how does this affect the overall inventory? Second question is, he talks about the fact that we've decimated Iran's capabilities, their military capabilities. But almost everybody knows that that's not true. And
at all.
Yes. I mean, hasn't he noticed that we've been engaged in tit for tat?
Right.
And tit for tat in my head means you hit, they hit. And if they hit, that means they have missiles to hit us with. And I think everybody understands that if we go after critical infrastructure inside of Iran, which is consistent with what General Kellogg is advocating, they're going to strike at critical infrastructure in the Gulf. And that is going to have devastating consequences, not only for the Gulf, but for the world economy. And probably the Red Sea will get shut down as well as the Gulf. The fact is that the Iranians have a second strike capability. And if you go up the escalation ladder, it looks to me like the Iranians win, not us. And again, that's one of the reasons, just one of the reasons that we quit the air war after 40 days. And, just to go to the blockade and marry the blockade to the air war, both of those campaigns, the air campaign and the naval campaign, were predicated on the assumption that you could punish Iran and the Iranians would throw up their hands. It should be manifestly clear to General Kellogg at this point in time that Iran can absorb enormous amounts of punishment. And we do not have the capability to bring them to their knees. It's just not going to happen. If they have to eat grass, they'll eat grass. They're not going to surrender. And so I just find it hard to believe that people like him are making those kinds of arguments. But I don't find it hard to believe that they do it in a very superficial way, because they can't unpack their favorite strategy. They can't unpack how it works because they have no story to tell. They're, basically purveying poppycock here.
Yeah, they are. But those words are landing in Tehran, and they don't have a neutral impact. You mentioned something about the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab. That is more poignant than some may realize. This was on July 8th, so this was two days ago. They said that if this was in response to one of the threats President Trump had renewed about hitting infrastructure and desalinization plants, oil infrastructure, which he called out by name. And they said in future confrontation, this meaning potentially, and I like your interpretation of this, in future, if there is another tit for tat or some kind of bigger strike, that options such as withdrawing from the NPT, changing the nuclear doctrine, and closing the Bab el-Mandab Strait along with the Strait of Hormuz will be under consideration. Do you think that is just, again, rhetoric, or do you think they may actually do that, and will we risk it to find out?
No, I don't think. I think, first of all, I think there is a possibility they would do that. I think it's absolutely clear that if we were to really attack Iran full force with air power, they would do it. If we escalate the tit for tats, they might do it. Who knows for sure? I would bet that they won't, but you can't be sure. But the question is President Trump going to unleash the dogs and assume that once he does that, he's going to win in ways that he was unable to win in the 40-day war or with the blockade? I find it hard to believe that Trump will do that. I mean, sometimes I think Trump is irrational when I listen to him talk. And if you believe he's irrational, then he may do something as foolish as to attack Iran with air power, again, like we did in the 40-day war. But I think in the final analysis, he will not do that. I think he and his advisors understand we have no war-winning strategy here. So I find it hard.
Although I would push back a little bit, because if they knew there was no war-winning strategy, I think if they were rational actors, they would already have taken the course off. And the fact that they haven't and are still talking about this stuff leads me to conclude or to fear they may not be rational actors and may do something serious like that. You think that's overblown?
No, I understand where you're coming from, but let me just push back a bit. You want to remember there was an air war for 40 days, and that ended, right? Then there was a blockade that went from April 13th to June 17th, and that did not work either. And we signed the Memorandum of Understanding, right? And that was a surrender document. I think that the Iranians clearly won, and they won on almost every point. They won on every point in that document. And the question is, what's happened since then? Trump has had a very difficult time swallowing the Memorandum of Understanding. And that's why you've had these two tit-for-tat operations. He's tried to test the Memorandum of Understanding. He's tried to see if he could get away with sending ships through the Omani Channel and the Strait. But he backed off on both occasions. He backed off after the June 26th June 28, tit for tat, and he's backed off now. And he's saying that, in effect, that he wants to go back to negotiations. That's what he's in effect saying when he says the Iranians called him up and said it's time to restart negotiations again. Why is he saying that? He's saying that because he understands he has no military option. So I think Trump and the Americans, and a lot of this has to do with Israeli pressure, are just having a devil of a time accepting the memorandum of understanding, which they signed.
And if I can, let me give you some graphic evidence of that pressure from the Israeli side. It's one thing if it's Jack Keane, if it's General Kellogg, Mike Pompeo, who all in just the last couple of days have just been begging to go back to war. It's one thing if it's those guys, but when it's Benjamin Netanyahu and he's going to say how cool it is to join with the U.S. military, but he says the job isn't finished.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said the following: "The combination of the world's two strongest air forces is unprecedented and unbeatable. When the Revolutionary Guards and the Iranian regime look up, they see only two things on the sides of the aircraft: the stars and stripes of the United States and the Star of David of Israel. The Iranian axis is weaker than ever, while Israel is stronger than ever. That said, I must stress that the war has not yet ended. Alongside the old challenges, new ones are emerging. Some axes are collapsing, while others are taking shape. We are mindful of this. We are prepared for every scenario."
So let's look at with the pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu too, because he's got his own domestic pressures to not acknowledge the MOU, to not get out of Lebanon, etc. And you see he's pushing back on President Trump. I mean, that's publicly. You can only imagine behind the scenes, and we've seen the results of that. How do you see that factor playing into what may happen next?
I think that he is a brilliant snake oil salesman. They just don't come any better than him. He's really terrific. You have to admire his ability to manipulate facts and logic to spin a story that looks favorable from Israel's point of view. Look, there's no pressure. There's no question that that Netanyahu and the Israel lobby here in the United States are putting enormous pressure on President Trump to back away from the memorandum of understanding. There's no question about that. Itself is whether you think Trump can afford to back away. Do you think Trump can allow the strait to be shut down again? And if you do away with the negotiations, can Trump and Netanyahu live with a situation where there's no nuclear deal? I mean, we haven't talked much about this, but what about the nuclear issue? If you don't have negotiations, right? If this MOU is not put in place and the negotiation process doesn't start, how do you deal with the nuclear issue? And don't the Iranians now have a very powerful incentive to get nuclear weapons? I certainly think they do. I'm not saying they will, but there's certainly pressure there. That's why we want to get a revised JCPOA. But Trump is, he's between a rock and a hard place here. If you look at the international economy, you look at the nuclear issue, and you look at our military capability to win this war, he really has no choice but to operationalize the MOU and reach a deal. But of course, the Israelis don't want to do that. And the question is, who's going to win? Which side is going to prevail? And I think that in the end, Trump will have to lean on Netanyahu and the Israelis really hard to get them out of southern Lebanon. I don't think he's going to have much choice. And if he doesn't succeed at that, the damage that will be done to the international economy and that will be done to President Trump's political situation here in the United States will be great.